There we go. All right. So chapter 25 picks up right where we left off in chapter 24. So we had the interlude of Easter in our journey through this, but Felix has left Paul in jail for 2 years, and then he leaves office, and Festus takes over. And I mean, I'm just amazed at the timeline on this deal. Like, he shows up in Caesarea, moves his stuff in, and 3 days later he finds himself in Jerusalem, and there they are. They're just right there with it. And part of me goes, I've been that guy. Anytime I've moved to a new appointment, it's always the first people. Like, when I was reading this, it's like it's the first people that show up when you first move in. It's the people who help you move in, or show up with a platter of cookies when you move in, or show up in your office, the first day you're in the office, kind of thing. It's like, all right, what's going on here? And and I hate to be cynical like that, but and oftentimes they're well-intentioned, and it's fine. But in this particular case, they are not well-intentioned, and they are not it won't be fine. So the chief priests and the leaders, essentially the Sanhedrin, they show up and they give a report against Paul, and they want Festus to do him a favor. They want Festus to transfer him to Jerusalem for some vague reason, but the underlying reason is they want to try to kill him again. And in a moment of clarity, it seems like, Festus says he's in Caesarea. I'll be there shortly, so we'll just leave him there, because it would probably take longer. More than likely, it would have taken him longer to get word to Caesarea, to get him back to Jerusalem before he would have then been back. And so it's probably just a timing issue on this. So whether he intentionally or unintentionally doesn't grant this favor, either way, he leaves Paul where he is, and again, intentionally or unintentionally, potentially saves his life. So again, it's another moment where a Roman official is intervening in some sense to save Paul's life. Lysias did it intentionally to get him out of Jerusalem, but here Festus maybe or maybe not did it intentionally. I can't determine that because I can't see inside of Festus's head. So anyway, so he says, anybody who has authority can come with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him. So he stays for another week, and he goes down to Caesarea, and the very next morning he sits on his judgment seat, on his tribunal, and he orders Paul to be brought in, and then there they are. They're right around him. They've sort of got him pinned down, and they've got Paul pinned down, and they start hurling these serious charges, these accusations against him. And then Luke very cleverly says, which they could not prove. Because, and here, and the thing about this is, like, they've had 2 years. They've had 2 years to try to figure out something, to gather more witnesses, to take statements from people who were in the thick of it when it happened, to find a way to stick some charges on him, but they still can't do it. He's like Teflon. Anyway, nothing sticks. Anyway,
Teflon Paul.
Yeah, no, Teflon Paul. So they're throwing these charges at him. They can't prove it, and then Paul has one line here in his defense. I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews, against the temple, or against the emperor. So against the Torah, against worship, and against Caesar. Those are the 3 things that they're trying to get him for. The whole, he's teaching Jews not to be Jews anymore. This is Luke's simplified version down. It's like, He's teaching Jews not to be Jews anymore. He's teaching, he's defiled the temple by bringing a Greek in, and then he's causing riots, which the Roman Empire doesn't like. Those are the three charges that have been brought against him several times. And so he's just simplifying it down to, I didn't do anything against the Torah, I didn't do anything against the temple, I didn't do anything against the emperor. And now, verse 9, there's this flip back where Festus now wants to do a favor for him, for the Jews. And so he asks this odd question. And I really do think it's odd that he would, he refused to bring him to Jerusalem the first time, but now he's like, well, okay, do you want me to take you down there and hear this all again in Jerusalem? It just doesn't make any sense to ask this question. I mean, he's obviously in this moment currying favor with the Jews because that's what they wanted. I wonder, I think, I don't know if it was N.T. Wright or if it was somebody else, they commented on that perhaps if he goes to Jerusalem, some of the members of the Sanhedrin would be able to sit sort of close to him and kind of guide Festus in the proceedings. I don't know if that's, I don't know historical practice on that or anything like that. It seems odd that a Roman official would rely on, would have direct Jewish influence on a ruling that he was supposed to make. I think back to Herod and Pilate, and they didn't get along whatsoever, except for Luke says, like in the Passion narrative, there's the I think it's 23. Hold on, in Luke 23. I know I looked it up. They were back and forth with one another. Yeah, this is 23:12. It says that same day Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this time they had been enemies. So Jesus was before Pilate. Pilate doesn't find any basis for an accusation. When he says when Jesus is from Galilee, then he sends him to Herod, and Herod treats him with contempt, and that day they become friends. So I mean, they hadn't been working together. So I just think it's interesting in this moment where a Roman is looking towards the Jewish council to help him make a decision, make a ruling. It just doesn't seem like it's normal practice. So, but in the context of trying to do them a favor, that seems to be where it fits. But then Paul says, I'm appealing to the emperor's tribunal. So he's appealing basically to the Roman court. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. So what he's saying is that he doesn't need to go to Jerusalem because they have nothing on him. They have nothing that will, he's already proven that. He's proven it to them, to the Sanhedrin, and he's proven it to Felix, and he proved it to Lysias, and now he's saying it again to Festus. And even Festus has seen what their charges are and heard what their charges are, and he's still not convinced of anything. Because if he was convinced of something, he would have done something in this moment. So he says, if I'm in the wrong and I've committed something for which I deserve to die, I'm not trying to escape death, but if there's nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. And then he says, I appeal to the emperor. This is his trump card. This is the last sort of spade that he has in his pocket to play. He's played the Roman citizen card a couple of times already, and now he's going to invoke the right of every Roman citizen to have their case appealed to the emperor. And appeals don't work the same way in the Roman system as they do in the U.S. judicial system. Appeals in the U.S. system work after a judgment has been made and a punishment has been handed down. Then somebody appeals to a higher court for a different decision. this is happening before there's any judgment. This is happening before there's any punishment being handed out. And so this is a right for Roman citizens to have their case heard by the emperor. And in this moment, Festus can only, it says he confers with his council, but really his only option is now to find a way to send him to Rome and appear before, interestingly enough, Nero. Nero is the emperor. Nero is the Caesar at this point. Now, historians say that at this point in time, in this late 50s, right around 60 AD, Nero was still of sound mind. He hadn't had the erratic tendencies that categorized sort of his last 6 or 8 years in power, when he was burning Christians at the stake and, you know, fiddling while Rome was burning kind of deal. He was still relatively normal in his behavior at this point. So he says, you've appealed to the emperor you will go. And so basically this punches Paul's ticket to Rome. This is where he's now moving forward in this goal of getting to Rome. And then there's a new character that comes on to the thing when you get to verse 13, King Agrippa and Bernice. So this is King Agrippa. This is Herod Agrippa II. So this is the son of the Herod Agrippa from chapter 12. This is the great grandson of Herod the Great from the infancy narratives of Jesus. And this is the great nephew of Herod Antipas, who was when Jesus was crucified. He was the Herod crucified. So he arrives in Caesarea to welcome Festus as the new Roman governor. And so Festus decides to just lay the case out there. I mean, it's like, you know, he's going to be here for a while. And he tells him, I lost no time. On the next day, I took my seat on the tribunal, ordered the man to be brought. The accusers stood up. They did not charge him with any of the crimes that I was expecting. Instead, they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. And so since he was at a loss of how to investigate, I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem. Paul appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of his imperial majesty. And Agrippa decides he would like to hear Paul. So it was, I think, N.T. Wright pointed this out in the lecture that I listened to, but he says that what we have in verses like 18 and 19 is a non-Christian's attempt to describe the resurrection, or what Paul's teaching about the resurrection. So they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion. So they're having conversation about worship and religion, about the Jewish religion, and about a certain Jesus who had died, but Paul asserted to be alive. So he's observed the conversation about the worship practices and the religious practices, and then there's this Jesus that's thrown in, and the best that Festus can do is say, well, there was this Jesus character who was part of the Jewish community, but he died, but Paul says he's alive, but they disagree, and so they're at odds with one another about this. This is the best he can do to try to describe the resurrection. And I think, and again, I love how all of these government officials paint themselves in the best light. Like, he doesn't say, and then I was going to, try to do a favor for the Jews by having them take them to Jerusalem. He says, since I was at a loss on how to investigate this. Yeah, it's like, okay, he's a good politician. But he appeals to his imperial majesty. and Agrippa says, I want to hear him. I want to hear this guy, what he has to say. Because again, Herod Agrippa II, he's the Jewish king, so he would be at least familiar with something going on. So on the next day, there's this big pomp and circumstance, and Paul's brought in, and then there's this sort of conversation between Festus and Agrippa, where I think Festus is trying to, like, okay, you listen real well, and I'll listen real well, and then we'll see if we can find something to put into a letter so that when I send Paul to Rome, the emperor doesn't kick the case out of his court and I don't get in trouble. It's similar to Lysias when he sent Paul to Felix. It's like, I've got to send something with him to say why this is getting pushed up the chain. Why would he appeal to Caesar? So he says, I have nothing definite to write to our sovereign about him. Therefore, I brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems, but then he says this ultimately like clear-headed thing in verse 27, for it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him. And I wrote a note out to the side that says, and possibly a waste of the emperor's time, meaning punishment for Festus. Because again, when I figured out that it was Nero, I was like, oh yeah, I wouldn't want to waste Nero's time, because who knows what crazy thing he might do.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a recap of 25.
Quick question.
Yes.
Question. As long as we're there,
Yep.
second question on that page.
Mhm.
How might Agrippa add the plans for Paul?
Right. What I wrote was that Agrippa may, as a Jew, be able to decipher some aspect of Paul's teaching that could be used against him by the Romans. And then I referenced 26:3, which obviously is in the next chapter, where Paul is speaking. Yeah, Paul speaking in verse 3, he says, because you are especially familiar, he's speaking to Agrippa, you are especially familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews, therefore I beg you to listen to me patiently. So if he's familiar with the disagreements between the different Jewish sects, and Paul's case in particular, or this, the way and Jesus and things like that, then he may be able to add to what, this letter that needs to be written along with him, because he's paying attention and he has a deeper insight that could be combined with Festus's knowledge of the laws of the Roman Empire. So yeah, so that's in my reflection, I think that's what I was like.
Okay.
Let's just turn the page and see. There you go.
Try calling.
So let's see. So on Saturday the 3rd is the first 5 verses. Questions there are, why would Jews jump on the new governor to close out Paul's case? Again, I think if he's short on info about this guy that's hanging out in prison, depending on how well the communication was between he and Felix about whatever matters were left over, they might be able to get him to make a decision in their favor quickly and just have it done. And then I think the second question is about how does Festus show Paul grace in this moment. A couple of ways. Well, I said he doesn't drag him to Jerusalem for a trial, but leaves him in Caesarea. And again, I can't discern whether that was intentional or unintentional.
Right.
So it may be unintentional grace, which is still grace, I would think, but um, there's I don't know. There's not a way to decipher that. So.
Okay.
So Monday, so Paul, why does Paul appeal his case to the emperor? I think he appeals to his case to the emperor because he knows he has done nothing wrong. But then secondary to that is that he's been called to go to Rome. And I'll talk about this in my message on Sunday, is that he's reached a point where he knows that he's been called to go to Rome, and the people who are, keeping him in custody aren't going to do anything about moving that ball forward. And so he's going to take the reins at this moment and say, all right, I've got this. This is my last card that I can play, and it's the most powerful one. It could still backfire on him, but he's at least going to play it and see what happens. So he's pushing that forward. So Paul appeals his case to the emperor because at some level he feels like he may not get to Rome if he doesn't.
Okay.
And Festus can't refuse Paul's request because that was the Roman citizen's right to make that appeal. Now, I also read the caveat to that is that, again, it can go south for you really quickly if the emperor is displeased by your appeal. And there's, and it didn't seem like there was necessarily an immediate, like, okay, get on a ship and go from wherever you are kind of protocol. So you may have been waiting around for a while, but he can't, Festus can't refuse the request.
Yeah.
Even
Well,
though
it would
so-
also, I'm sorry, go.
Oh, I was just going to say, even though he made it look like he had to confer with his council about, should we do this or not? Okay.
From a Paul standpoint, I would think it would be, since he knows he has to get to Rome, if he gets let out of this situation, the Jews are going to be waiting for him to kill him. He's not going to make it to Rome. So he's probably better off being in Roman custody to get to Rome,
right,
and do what he needs to do.
Yeah, I think it's a pragmatic decision as well as an evangelistic decision. I mean,
Yeah.
he knows, he knew that they were coming after him once. He found out about that plot. So I'm sure he wouldn't put it past them to do it again. And whether he knew about this secondary, the secondary situation here at the beginning of chapter 25, he's better off in Roman custody to get to Rome. So
Now, you said you're going to be using what part of this for your sermon?
So the first 12 verses, so 1 to 12 is my
1 to 12 is the sermon?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I will use the interaction between Festus and Agrippa to set up next week. I use that to set up next week's message on chapter 26. All right. So again, this is Herod Agrippa II. He's the Jewish king. So how does King Agrippa respond to Paul's testimony? At least initially, he responds with interest to hear what he has to say. He may have heard through the grapevine about this guy Paul and him being in jail in Caesarea, or some of the other things that have taken place in Jerusalem over the last few years. And I made the parallel between Agrippa II and Herod Antipas, who was the Herod when Jesus was crucified. That was his great uncle. And so, there was, Luke says in, go back to Luke 23. Hold on. 23, 8 and 9. So when Herod saw, so this is Herod Antipas, saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned him at some length, but Jesus gave him no answer. So there seems to be this family tradition of there being something, intriguing about things related to Jesus. Obviously, Herod from the Gospels would have been hearing about the word on the street about this Jesus guy, especially as he rides into town on a donkey, and people are waving branches and throwing their cloaks on the ground, and he's turning over tables in the temple, and all this kind of stuff is it's that last week of his life. And so Luke tells us that Herod was had wanted to talk to him for a long time, hoping to see some kind of sign. So so almost like a magic trick of some sort. Maybe he heard about that wedding in Cana, and was like, hey, can you turn this water into wine again, kind of thing, or make some take a sack lunch and make enough to feed a stadium, kind of thing. So there's this so it seems like there's this family history for the Herods being interested in what's going on with this Jesus character. And so Agrippa is like, sure, let's hear what he has to say. And when we get to chapter 26, we'll see that indeed he is very interested in what Paul has to say about Jesus. And so that's so I read ahead and then came back and looked at it a little bit, so shh, don't tell anybody. Oh, this is being recorded. Okay. Sorry. But when you get to 26, you see that he's interested. So it made sense with what had happened in the Gospels. And so I was like, okay, so there's this parallel. But there's also this, Felix and Festus, for me, also parallel Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman governor at the time. And he was interested in what Jesus had to say, or at least was, he didn't just like dismiss it altogether. Like, Festus and Felix, they didn't quite know what to do with Jesus. Felix sort of, he left them in jail for 2 years, and, was interested. He would call him back and be like, hey, talk to more about this. And then, and Festus was, willing to hear what Paul had to say. And so, and sort of vaguely understood what he was talking about this Jesus person who, has died, but now Paul says he's still alive again. And Pilate was, again, he heard Jesus out, and then found no fault with him. In the same way that, Festus and Felix were like, you don't have anything to charge him with. Like they didn't know what to do with him because there was nothing they could do with him. And so in both cases, they turn it back over to the people, and, and in both cases, the people want to kill him. Now, Jesus successfully or in their mind, he was killed successfully in their mind. Paul uses his trump card to avoid that and go to Rome. Eventually, he's killed by the Roman government. But anyway, that's a story for another day.
Yeah, that's reading too far ahead.
Right, that's too far ahead. Yeah. Acts doesn't actually tell us that story. So there you go. So he responds with interest, and Agrippa could really do nothing with the case. I mean, he was a Jewish king. So if the Sanhedrin couldn't counsel, if the Sanhedrin couldn't get him on any charges, he couldn't, he could kick it back to, back to Festus, but Festus already didn't know what to do with him, and he'd already appealed to Rome, so it was already out of his hands. So there wasn't really anything he could do with it.
Okay.
So, and then, so then we come back to this on the 7th. Festus can't accuse Paul of anything based on the testimony, but what can he do? And this is related to the letter. So he could make something up. I mean, I just came up with some ideas. I mean, he could make something up. I mean, he could, testify to false charges, I guess. He could hold Paul in custody, which is similar to what Felix did, and just leave him in jail, rot. And he could listen as Paul talks to see what he might say that he could use, that he could charge him for. So, I mean, if Felix, heard him talk again and again, maybe Festus would do something similar and eventually hope that Paul would slip up and say something against the emperor, and then, okay, now I can snap him up and get this done. But his only other option is just to send him to the emperor, as he's already requested, but do so without any charges attached to him, which could turn sour for Festus.
Yeah.
So, let's see. And then we talked about how Agrippa might add to plans for Paul. So,
Okay.
there you go. So, all right. We talked about all the questions in the book. Are there other questions that came up along the way?
I don't think so. The earlier one about Paul's marital status, but other than that, no.
Right.
Okay, so, but as far as the sermon goes, it is going to be on 25. So the readings for 26 are in preparation for the following week.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So everybody will be reading ahead at this point.
Okay.
This is the week everything flipped. So.
Yep.
So, my message for the 11th is about chapter 25. And so just keep going there so that the readings are finished before I finish the series.
Okay.
So there you go. And I am working on today our spring and summer plans as far as worship goes. I think we've got a general outline for May, because I think each of the weeks following the series will have its own unique sort of identifier. Like there's Mother's Day, and then there's Confirmation, and then there's we're going to do Pentecost. I'm pretty sure we're going to just do Pentecost on the 23rd, and then we're moving Senior Sunday to the 30th, and give them the floor to be part of that service. And then we'll figure out what we do in June. And we are, and then in a follow-up to an earlier question you asked weeks ago about outside stuff, we are actively working on making that happen. We're trying to figure out what that's going to look like and when, and we still have some pieces to put together for that, but I'm going to send an email out today to the congregation. Hopefully, if we can get our Constant Contact is giving us trouble right now. A lot of our emails are landing in people's junk mail, and that just started on Friday. I don't want to put too much into spiritual warfare, but there might have been some spiritual warfare going on there. Anyway, but like it was all of a sudden, like we got emails, Sunday, Palm Sunday came out just fine. Thursday's email came out just fine for the bulletin for Monday, Thursday, and then Friday, and then the 2 bulletins on Sunday. They all landed in my junk mail, and our read rate went from like almost 50% to 10% overnight.
Wow.
And so some of them are getting through, but all of them for me landed in my junk mail. And we tried it if it was me sending it. We tried it if it was Debbie Willis sending it. We tried it, and it would work. It would be okay if it was like just one person, was getting the email, but on the mass list, it was not working at all. So we are figuring that out. So hopefully I can send out an email today to the congregation, but we have, we've gotten an initial number from the insurance that's it's far away from being settled. But even in the midst of that, we should get our first insurance check this week to begin paying for the things that have already occurred, the remediation and other things that have already been shelled out. So,
but what about the expense for the electronics for the outdoor?
Yeah. So I messaged back. I talked with Bobby about it, and just told him like, what did I say? Hold on. I mean, what we did for sunrise service worked well. I mean, we had my microphone, Casey's microphone, we had the keyboard, and we had 2 speakers set up. That it worked out just fine for that. Now the challenge in that becomes it wasn't FM transmitted, so nobody was sitting in their car listening to it on the radio. That requires an extra setup, and which is we do have the transmitter, but it requires, I think, an extra amp, which we don't have. So we could do a similar setup right now, like we do for Live Nativity, where we have the big speakers and we just crank it out to everybody who's listening. So we can do that. But he hasn't gotten back with me on what those numbers might look like for getting a full setup back. Some of those are going to be covered under insurance, and we'll get them replaced. So yeah, we're working on it.
Okay.
So, sorry, I don't have solid numbers for you.
Well, now, so if we as a class wanted to make a donation, could we make it specifically enough to electronic worship items?
We have a designated line item that's AV material, and generally when somebody wants to make a donation specifically towards technology, that's where it goes.
AV material? Or
Yeah,
AV material?
Yeah, you just tell her, you can just tell Vicky that that's for AV stuff for worship equipment, and she knows what line that goes in. Okay. When we had a gift to buy our video camera, that's where it went, and several other things. So she's all right. She's very familiar with that particular account.
I'll bet she is by now.
For the last year, we've been spending lots of money out of that account. So.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah, very good.
All right.
Awesome. Well, if there's anything I can do, just let me know. Appreciate you, and hope that you have a great week. And one of these days, I would love to pop in on your Sunday school class, and just maybe during May, when you're past the Acts series, and just to just to pop in and see how everybody's doing and, see the faces.
That'd
And
be great.
so, do you use the same Zoom link every week?
Yes.
Okay. If you'll forward that to me, I'll give you a heads up when I'm coming, but I'd love to be able to do that. So I've jumped
Okay,
in.
and
I haven't
now-
jumped in on Sandy's class yet. I've jumped in on James's class.
As far as May goes, we are basically on our own, right?
Yeah, you're on your own for May. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Just as long as I know that now, not
Yeah,
not in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. So you've
Okay.
got May 2nd covered, but then after that, for the next 4 weeks after that, you'll be on your own, and then then we'll figure out what we do for June, July, and August. That's my afternoon activities. Figure out what June, July, and August. Are gonna-
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
you bet, Gary. Have a great day.
You too. Bye for now.